by thanking each and every one of you for responding to my invitation to be here this morning. I'm joined here by the group of women behind me to express our deep concerns about the fitness of Mr. Earnie Porta, who is a candidate for the Brentsville Board of County Supervisors from the Occoquan District to serve in the office that he is seeking. Mr. Porta was involved in a civil case involving allegations of gender harassment, the retaliatory dismissal of a whistleblower employee, and the creation of a sexually hostile work environment that resulted in a jury finding that awarded the Georgetown University employee $90,000 in compensatory damages and back pay and a $1 million award for punitive damages. Mr. Porta was asked to explain these issues in a 2005 campaign when he sought to unseat then Delegate Michelle McQuigg, and the Porter campaign spokeswoman Lucinda Quinn was quoted in Potomac News on September 30th of 2005 as providing the following defense of Mr. Porta, and I quote, "Porta was named in the lawsuit because he managed the office at the time the lawsuit was filed," end quote. Here's another quote. "When you sue an organization, you have to name a person, and Earnie was the manager of that office." Another quote. "It was the actions of Estei's co-workers that created the hostile work environment." And the last quote from this article defending Mr. Porta is, "He was not ever personally accused of sexually harassing anyone," end quote. On their face, these explanations appear to be plausible accounts of a person who was completely and totally innocent and that may have just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But my review of court documents and the testimony of that of 11 citizens heard in graphic detail over the 7-day trial paints a far different picture. I warn you in advance that I personally cannot repeat some of the language attributed directly to Mr. Porta in a sworn testimony that was heard by that jury, so I will only cite some of the testimony. I have provided documents for the media to review. Again, these are excerpts from sworn testimony. Mr. Porta talked about specific women in the office that he wanted to have sex with. He had a to-do list, which included his boss. Another excerpt, Mr. Porta frequently appeared on the prowl for women at work and made it known that he had sexual relationships with other employees in the financial affairs organization. Another excerpt, the plaintiff testified that from the time he became her boss, Porta made clear he wanted to hire more men. Quote, "I don't like being outnumbered by women here," he told the plaintiff and her co-worker at one point. "It's time to get a little more testosterone in the office." He accordingly filled both of the vacancies that arose with men, even though the plaintiff had been slated for one of them. Thereafter, she said, quote, "It was much more of a locker room," end quote. Testimony also revealed Mr. Porta publicly screamed while cursing and berating the plaintiff, allowed other employees to make inappropriate comments, punched her in the arm in front of witnesses. Also very concerning is the reassignment of duties that fell under her job description that were not reassigned to her when she returned from her maternity leave. The testimony of the statements made directly and repeatedly by Mr. Porta, in which he used grossly profane and demeaning references when speaking to others about the female plaintiff, who was his employee, are extremely upsetting. This sworn testimony paints a far different picture than the Porta campaign would like voters to believe or know about with regard to Mr. Porta and his actions that led to this lawsuit. I believe that any candidate who authorizes the publication of such a distorted and untrue account, and again I'm referring to 2005, his defense of this lawsuit, of their actions in a legal case renders themselves unfit for public office on that basis alone. But we certainly cannot set aside the conclusions of that 11-member jury that Mr. Porta directly engaged in contact that was so violative of the law and led to a substantial finding of compensatory and punitive damages. I understand that some attempt to exonerate Mr. Porta or minimize the conduct of Mr. Porta on the basis that an appeals court reduced the punitive damages award to $300,000. But the reduction in the punitive damages award was made because the judge found that the jury had exceeded the statutory maximum for punitive damages allowed under the law, which was capped at $300,000. So the maximum, and I underline maximum, amount of damages that could be recovered under the law was $300,000. And that was the amount that was adjudicated to be the penalty of Mr. Porta and his employer, Georgetown University. This is not an exoneration. This is a condemnation. To be clear, as I understand this case, there were no allegations that Georgetown University engaged in any of this conduct, but rather only they failed to take action to restrain or remove Mr. Porta as the supervisor to terminate the conditions of a sexually hostile workplace once complaints had been filed by female employees. The workplace should have been immediately secured as a safe place for women as they perform their professional duties. I believe it is instructive for all of us to understand what happened when the plaintiff complained to Georgetown University officials about the behavior of Mr. Porta in the office. According to court documents, Mr. Porta proceeded to give her an unfavorable job evaluation, bypassed her for promotions, and eventually was able to have her fired from her employment. Mr. Porta's fellow employees testified at the trial that on the day the plaintiff was terminated, Mr. Porta ordered cigars and champagne to be delivered to the office to celebrate that event. Based on the trial testimony, that is the way Mr. Porta treats women employees who object to his sexually charged locker room workplace environment. I believe that every woman employee of Prince William County is entitled to the same protections that the Supreme Court has required for all workplaces in the United States. Based on the sworn testimony of others who have had experiences with Mr. Porta, it is my firmly held opinion that Mr. Porta is simply unfit to serve on the Board of County Supervisors. And I would also like to bring forward a couple women that are here with me today that would like to make their own comments. And I'll start with Jo Watts, Occoquan resident.
I came here to speak today because I am an Occoquan resident. This man will be leading me and making my life good or bad through the next few years. I don't feel he's qualified to do that. I feel that his treatment of women and also fellow men in his workplace is not qualified to do anything to do with the government. I don't know how you feel about it, but some of the statements he has made, as Jeanine had said, you can't even repeat because they're disgusting. That's testimony to people who ride home with him every day in a carpool. My whole thing is respect is the biggest word in my language. He does not respect me as a woman. He does not respect these women. He does not respect anybody in the Occoquan district that is a woman. That disqualifies him, and I call for him to step down from the race. They also, the gentleman that rode for him also said that he occasionally would make terribly sexual innuendos, and towards the end of all of this, he would start to drive erratically fast. He would go into a depressive state. Now, the only reason I'm saying this is because it's in the court records. I am not casting dispersions upon him without having the facts to back them up. What I want to leave you with is this building that we are standing in is where our government's business is done. We must respect this building. I ask you, standing out there and in the press, I ask you, would you like your wife, your daughter, your granddaughter to come into this building to do her job and have someone like Earnie Porta make disparaging remarks about her as she passes by? Would you like for your wife, your daughter, or your granddaughter to lose a job because of the way he treats the women? He is on a power trip. He wants power. He has power in his heart. It's the wrong power. You as citizens, you women, you have the biggest power ever granted to us by our Constitution. You have the power of the vote. You go out and vote. Vote your conscience on what I've told you today and what these other ladies have told you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Joe. And the second person I would like to invite forward is a woman who I literally just met right before this press conference began. And her name is Claudia Cruz. So Claudia, will you come up and identify yourself and why you're here this morning?
Thank you. First, I'd like to start by saying I did not know about this meeting until late last night, so I have not really had time to prepare. I worked for the town of Occoquan for 14 and a half years, the last 7 of which Earnie was the mayor. In the last 2 years, Earnie decided for whatever reason that he did not want me to work there. And I had a very difficult time for him to respond to emails, to phone calls, numerous that I would make in conduct of business, which he refused to respond to. Also, it made it very difficult, condescending emails that the town council would be CC'd on, made it very uncomfortable for me. I had wanted to work for the town for 20 years. I lasted 14 and a half, and I left totally because of Earnie Porta. His negative comments were routine that he made about town residents, about town merchants, anything I think, and people did not have any idea how he would be very nice to your face, but inside the walls of town hall was very different. I do not trust him, and those are firsthand interactions I've had with him, so I certainly urge you to not vote for Earnie Porta.
Thank you to each of these brave women who joined me this morning to share this belief. I believe that this is a real war on women. The real war on women that gets so much political attention these days. The war on women is waged in the trenches of professional workplaces by men who fail to respect women as co-equals in the conduct of business affairs. Those men who treat us as sex objects, who objectify us because of our gender, and who view every conversation between a man and a woman as being a flirtatious encounter. Those are the people who represent the greatest danger to women in the workplace today. Earnie Porta owes the voters of Occoquan Magisterial District an explanation for his history. Either he should drop out of the race or explain himself to the voters. This is about trust and transparency. And if we had to find this ourselves, how will there be trust and transparency between Mr. Porta and the Occoquan citizens? In an era of working spouses, working daughters, it's clear that Mr. Porta has not achieved a level of respect or sensitivity for working professionals. Thank you, and I will take a few questions. Hillary? Yes. Thank you, Hillary. That's a good question, and I appreciate you asking it. Well, first of all, 10 years ago when Mr. Porta ran against then Delegate Michelle McQuigg, he was asked these questions, and I read earlier in my statement some comments or defenses that were offered up by his spokeswoman. and I'll be happy to share those with you again. It has not been easy to obtain these court documents, but because the media chose to take a pass on this, I decided it was worth digging into, and I literally just received these yesterday. These are court documents in this file that are irrefutable. And the voters have a right to know before before November 3rd, what Mr. Porter's history of treating women is. And he needs to account for it. He has not done that yet. He didn't do it 10 years ago, and he hasn't done it in this race. And he owes it to the Occoquan residents and Prince William County as a whole, or he needs to simply step out of the race. And one other note, Hillary, you're right, it is a matter of character too, Angela, and the voters have a right to know the fabric of our character at every elected position, whether it's local elections up to who represents us in the White House. It is a matter of character also. And certainly the voters are now paying attention, especially right before they go to the polls next week on November 3rd. But again, I just acquired these documents after pursuing them, and it took time. They're not easy to find. Civil court cases are not easy documents to obtain.
Hello, Board columnist, Prince William today. Do you plan to share those online anywhere?
Yes, thank you, Al, for asking that. They're actually already online. They are on the Prince William County GOP website. You can obtain the documents through the link on the website. Thank you for asking that. Any other questions? You gonna let me make it to my ribbon cutting on time? No? Okay, well, again, I appreciate you coming down here on short notice, certainly in the downpour of rain, and I'm very grateful to the women that stand behind me. And I'll be happy to answer any more questions later in the day if you so need to get in touch with me to follow up. And one last clarification or direction. I encourage you to go to the court documents. They're irrefutable. And you can, again, find them online at pwcgop.org and access them yourselves. There are a lot of documents, but they need to be read and they need to be reported on because the voters have a right to know. Thank you.